Good morning and welcome to today's daily reflection. The Old Testament prophet Hosea, who lived around 600 years before Jesus, who is better known these days for his marriage, when God told him in his first verse of his book to go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her, for like an adulterous wife, this land of Israel is guilty of unfaithfulness to God. Later in chapter 6 comes one of his better known statements when God, through him, said, I want you to show love, not offer sacrifices. I want you to know me more than I want burnt offerings. Today's reading reminds us of what Hosea was trying to say. The reading is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, reading from verse 1. Meanwhile, the crowds grew until thousands were milling around and stepping on each other. Jesus turned first to his disciples and warned them, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, their hypocrisy. The time is coming when everything that is covered up will be revealed, and all that is secret will be made known to all. Whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have whispered behind closed doors will be shouted from the housetops for all to hear. What is the price of 5 sparrows? 2 copper coins? Yet God does not forget a single one of them, and the very hairs on your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. This is the word of the Lord. It is interesting to note that Jesus describes hypocrisy as leaven or as yeast. The unique feature of yeast is that a very little will spread through a whole lump of dough. Hypocrisy spreads just like that. First Hosea, then Jesus tells us of those who have an outward appearance of godliness, but being full of wrongdoing inwardly. That is why Jesus continued to give such strong warnings. Here, Jesus identified the Pharisees, particularly, of having a hypocritical nature, because although they tried to maintain an outward veneer of holiness, they lacked the heart and love for both the people and of God. But what about us today? Are we any better? What Jesus is saying is that if our heart isn't in our action, then our action is worthless. Another Old Testament prophet, Malachi, spoke of this problem as the people at the time were obedient to God in bringing sacrifices as directed in the book of Deuteronomy, but they considered their obedience to be a burden. It had become a heartless religion rather than a grace-driven obedience. In other words, they wanted to get on with their lives with no thought of what the sacrifices signified. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus will again confront the Pharisees with, if only you had known the meaning of, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. The most important message in those verses of Luke is the reference to the sparrows. Sparrows, tiny and insignificant, were sold cheaply in the market, yet Jesus assures us that not a single one goes unnoticed by God. What is the price of 5 sparrows? 2 copper coins? So don't be afraid. You're more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. If God is mindful of such small creatures, then so how much more are we, created in his image? The mention that even the hairs on our head are numbered reiterates this point. God's attention to detail, his intimate knowledge of us, signifies our immense value in his eyes. God knows what's in our heart. He knows what our motivations are. Are our acts of worship and our offerings, those that help those less fortunate than us, is it done with our heart, with love? Or is it more as a feeling of burden, as an obligation? Jesus reminds us that those verses, that nothing remains hidden from God. This reveals that God knows our every action, our every thought. There is no escaping. Now, although we live in a fairly affluent area compared to many others, my work as a volunteer in a local food bank, I regularly see tears and people who have lost all dignity. A woman came in last week just looking for, in her words, any scraps that might be left over. Here stood someone made in God's image, valuable in his eyes. I could imagine her circumstances broke his heart. It almost broke mine. We were able to thankfully help her materially along with advice from the welfare team. I know I am very thankful for those who do contribute weekly to Compassion Acts. Those contributions, I can assure you, are actually saving lives. So I want to finish with that in mind, with those words from Jesus. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you as a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And Jesus will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Well, whatever you do the rest of this week, do it with compassion and do it with a smile. Bye for now.